Life has a funny way of flipping the script when you least expect it. I'm Ella, an economist by profession. If you'd asked me a few years back, I would have said I had it all. A loving husband, Mark, a darling daughter, Laylee, and a cozy home that was all ours. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Let me take you back to where it all began, to the days filled with hope and plans for the future. It was a lazy Sunday afternoon, the kind where the sun lazily peeks through the curtains, and the smell of fresh bread from Mark's bakery fills the air. Mark was in the kitchen, his hands covered in flour, a look of concentration on his face that always made me smile. "Hey Ella, can you grab the vanilla extract? It's on the top shelf," Mark called out, not looking up from his mixing bowl. I walked over to the pantry, reaching for the small bottle. You could put things where I can reach them," I teased, handing him the extract. Mark grinned, wiping his hands on his apron. "Where's the fun in that?" "I like it when you have to stretch," he said playfully. I rolled my eyes. "You're impossible, you know that." "That's why you married me," he quipped, turning back to his dough. Lily, our 6-year-old, was sprawled on the living room floor, her coloring books spread around her. She was humming a tune, completely engrossed in her artwork. "Mommy, look. I'm drawing a picture of our family," she said, waving me over. "That's fantastic, Lily. Speaking of the bakery, Mark, have you thought about what we discussed, about maybe expanding?" I asked, a bit hesitant. Mark's expression changed slightly, a frown forming on his forehead. "Ella, we've been over this. The bakery is doing just fine as it is. Why mess with a good thing? But we could do so much more, for Lily's future and maybe even get that house we've been dreaming about." I pressed on. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Ella. I like the bakery the way it is, small, manageable. I don't want the headache of a bigger place." I felt a twinge of frustration but decided not to push it. Okay. I just think we should think bigger, that's all," Mark shrugged, a hint of irritation in his voice. "Maybe let's just enjoy today, okay? No more talk about expanding," he suggested. I nodded, not wanting to ruin the day. As the day wound down, I couldn't shake off a feeling of unease. Mark and I had always been a team, dreaming and planning together, but lately it felt like we were on different cages, especially when it came to ambition and our future. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the once light-hearted banter between Mark and me began to lose its charm. The bakery, once a symbol of our shared dreams, had become a stagnant reminder of what could have been but wasn't. I was busy climbing the ladder at my company while Mark seemed content with the status quo. That's when the first cracks started to show. One evening, I came home from a particularly grueling day at work, my mind swirling with numbers and projections. Mark was in the living room, feet propped up, scrolling through his phone. The bakery had closed early, and he hadn't bothered to pick up Lily from school. My mother had stepped in, as she often did these days. "Mark, you were supposed to pick up Lily today." "I had a meeting, and I couldn't make it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mark didn't look up. "Oh, was that today?" "I forgot," he replied casually. "Forgot? Mark, this is becoming a habit. You need to step up," I said, frustration creeping into my tone. Mark finally looked up, annoyance splashing in his eyes. I said, "I'm sorry, Ella." "What more do you want?" "I'm not the only parent here," he retorted. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in my temper. "It's not just about picking up Lily, Mark. It's about us, about our future. Don't you think we should be doing more for her, for us?" Mark shrugged, an indifferent expression on his face. "We're doing fine, Ella. Why are you always pushing for more? Can't you just be happy with what we have?" I sat down, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. "I am happy, Mark, but I also want more for our daughter, for our family." "Is that so wrong?" Mark stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You know what, Ella? I'm tired of this. Every day, the same lecture about wanting more. I'm going to my mom's." And just like that, he grabbed his keys and left, leaving me alone with my thoughts and a growing sense of dread. This wasn't the first time he'd run to his mother, Susan, whenever we had a disagreement. It was becoming his go-to move, and I was left to wonder where I stood in this marriage. The next day, I received a call from Susan, and her tone was anything but friendly. Ella, what's this I hear about you and Mark fighting again? You're pushing him too hard. He's happy with his bakery. Why can't you be? Susan's voice was sharp, accusatory. I clenched the phone tighter, trying to remain calm. Susan, I'm just thinking about our future, about Lily's future. Mark and I need to be on the same page. Well, maybe your page is the problem, Ella. You're always wanting more. Mark is a simple man, and you knew that when you married him, Susan retorted. I felt a flash of anger. Simple doesn't mean stagnant, Susan. I'm trying to build a better future for all of us. Susan scoffed. You're just being ungrateful and greedy. Mark is doing his best. You should appreciate that. The conversation ended shortly after with no resolution in sight. I hung up, feeling more alone than ever. Trouble hit like a freight train, and it hit hard. Mark's bakery, once the center of our small community, started to lose its charm and customers. Bills piled up, and the once cozy bakery felt more like a sinking ship. I was pulling extra hours at work, trying to keep us afloat, but it felt like bailing water out of a boat with a hole in it. One evening, I came home to find Mark slumped at the kitchen table, a stack of bills in front of him, his face a picture of defeat. Mark, what's going on? I asked, a sinking feeling in my stomach. He looked up, his eyes tired and red. The bakery, Ella. I can't keep it running anymore. We're bleeding money? My heart sank. What are we going to do? We have Lily to think about, I said, my voice trembling. Mark ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration. I'd become all too familiar with I don't know, Ella. I really don't. I never thought it would come to this. I sat down beside him, trying to process the news. Well, maybe it's time to consider other options. You could look for a job, at least until we figure things out, I suggested. Mark's expression hardened. A job? What, and work for someone else? I'm a business owner, Ella, not some office drone. He retorted. I tried to keep my voice calm. Mark, this isn't about pride. It's about our family, about making ends meet. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. I don't need a lecture, Ella. I know what's at stake. And with that, he stormed out of the room, leaving me with a pile of unpaid bills and a head full of worries. The next day, I decided to talk to Susan, hoping she might be able to get through to Mark. I dialed her number, my hands shaking slightly. Susan, it's about the bakery. Mark's really struggling, and I think he needs to consider looking for a job, I said, trying to sound diplomatic. A job? My son is not going to work for someone else. He's a business owner, Ella. He's better than that, Susan snapped. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my frustration in check. Susan, the bakery is closing. We have bills to pay, a daughter to raise. This isn't about being better than anything. It's about survival. Susan scoffed. Survival? You always exaggerate, Ella. Mark will figure it out. He doesn't need to stoop to being an employee. The conversation went nowhere, and I hung up feeling more helpless than ever. Mark's refusal to face reality, combined with Susan's delusional support, was a recipe for disaster. That night, Mark and I sat in silence, the tension between us thick enough to cut with a knife. I wanted to scream, to shout, to shake some sense into him, but I knew it would be pointless. The closure of the bakery brought more than just financial strain. It tore at the very fabric of our family life. Mark, once a bustling business owner, now spent his days idly lounging around the house. I'd come home exhausted from work, only to find dishes piled in the sink, laundry undone, and Lily left to her own devices. One evening, I arrived home later than usual, my head throbbing from a day crammed with meetings. The house was in disarray, and the sight of Mark on the couch, beer in hand, watching TV, was the last straw. Mark, what the hell? Look at this place. Can't you at least tidy up a bit? I snapped, my patience wearing thin. Mark looked up, unfazed. Oh, come on, Ella. I'm not your maid, and I had a rough day. I was flabbergasted. Rough day doing what, Mark? You've been sitting here all day. He shrugged, taking another swig of his beer. I'm dealing with stuff, okay? It's not easy losing your business. I threw my bag down, frustration boiling over. And you think it's easy for me, working all day to keep us afloat while you do nothing. Mark stood up, his face a mask of anger. I'm not doing nothing, Ella. I'm trying to figure things out. Figure what out, Mark? How to avoid responsibility. We have a daughter, for God's sake, I retorted, my voice rising. He shot back. Don't you think I know that? I don't need you nagging me every day. The argument escalated, with harsh words and accusations flying back and forth. Lily, hearing the commotion, came into the room, her eyes wide and scared. Mommy, Daddy, please stop yelling, she pleaded, her voice small and shaky. We both fell silent, the anger dissipating as we looked at our daughter. Mark muttered something under his breath and walked out, leaving me to comfort a crying Lily. Lately, the days that followed were a blur of silent meals, curt exchanges, and an ever-widening gulf between us. I was struggling to keep it together, juggling work, household chores, and caring for Lily, while Mark seemed to retreat further into his shell. The tension in our house had become a constant, like some unwelcome guest who had overstayed their welcome. But nothing prepared me for what came next. It started with small amounts of cash disappearing from my purse. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful, but then the amounts grew larger. One evening, after noticing another missing $50, I confronted Mark. He was in the living room as usual, eyes glued to the TV. Mark, have you been taking money from my purse? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't look at me. What? No, why would I do that? I felt a surge of anger. Because it's missing, Mark, and I know I didn't spend it. Mark finally turned to face me, his expression defensive. Look, I needed some cash, okay? It's not a big deal. I was incredulous. Not a big deal? It's stealing, Mark, from your own wife. He stood up, his voice rising. I don't mean a lecture, Ella. I took a bit of cash for beer. It's not like I'm blowing it on something stupid. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Beer? You're stealing money for beer while I'm working day and night to keep the family together? Mark's face hardened. Yeah, beer. It's not like I have much else to enjoy these days. I felt a mix of anger and sadness. That's your excuse. I'm out there busting my back, and you're here drinking away our money. Mark scoffed. Oh, please, you're always so dramatic. It's just a few bucks. I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. This isn't just about the money, Mark. It's about trust. How can I trust you if you're stealing from me? Mark didn't answer, just turned back to the TV, effectively ending the conversation. The next day, I made a decision. I called Susan to talk about the situation. It's about Mark. He's been taking money from my purse for beer. I said, trying to keep my emotions in check. Susan laughed, a harsh, grating sound. Oh, Ella, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. He's just having a tough time right now. I couldn't believe her response. Susan, he's stealing from me. How can you just brush that off? Susan's tone was dismissive. He's your husband, Ella. What's yours is his. Besides, it's just a bit of cash. I felt a flash of anger. Just a bit of cash. That's not the point, Susan. He's not contributing anything, and now he's taking what little we have left. Susan was unyielding. Well, I don't see the problem. He needs to unwind. You're being too hard on him, she insisted. I hung up, realizing that talking to Susan was pointless. She was never going to see things from my perspective. One morning, I woke up to find Mark's side of the bed empty. That wasn't unusual these days. But as hours turned into a full day without a word from him, worry started to set in. I called his phone repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail. Finally, after a week of silence, I heard the front door open. Mark walked in, looking different. There was an unfamiliar air of confidence about him. He wasn't alone. His mother, Susan, strutted in behind him with a smug look on her face. Mark, where the hell have you been? I've been worried sick, I exclaimed, a mix of relief and anger washing over me. Mark looked at me, a smirk on his lips. Oh, Ella, always so dramatic. I have news. I was confused. News? What news? He pulled out the lottery ticket, waving it in front of me. "This, my dear Ella, is our ticket out. I won, Ella. I won $10 million. My heart skipped a beat. "What? How?" Susan chimed in, her voice dripping with condescension. "He bought a lottery ticket with your credit card. Looks like it was a smart investment after all." I was stunned, my mind racing. "My credit card? You used my credit card without asking?" Mark's smirk grew wider. "Well, I needed something to cheer me up after all the nagging, and look, it paid off." The reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. He had taken my card, bought a lottery ticket, and won. It was almost too much to take in. "But Mark, that's our money then. We won," I said, still trying to process the news. Mark's expression turned cold. "No, Ella, I won. And with this money, I'm starting a new life without you." I felt as if the floor had been pulled from under me. "What are you saying?" He was blunt, his words cutting deep. "I'm saying I'm leaving you, Ella. I'm tired of this life, tired of you. I want a fresh start, and now I can afford it." Susan laughed, a cruel sound that made my skin crawl. "Oh, Ella, you really thought you were so smart, didn't you? But you see, you've underestimated my son. He's a winner, and you're just left with nothing." Mark grabbed a suitcase he had apparently packed earlier. "I'm moving in with Mom. You can keep the house and whatever else. I don't need it anymore." Reeling from Mark's departure and his shocking betrayal, I knew I had to act fast. The first thing I did was call a lawyer, Mr. Jacobs, a no-nonsense man who had a reputation for being tough and fair. "Mr. Jacobs, my husband won the lottery with a ticket he bought using my credit card, and now he's leaving me and taking everything," I explained, my voice shaking with emotion. Mr. Jacobs listened intently, his voice calm and steady. "All right, Ella, let's meet tomorrow. We'll go over everything, and I'll see what we can do." The next day, I sat in Mr. Jacobs' office, poring over bank statements and the credit card transaction that showed the purchase of a lottery ticket. "Based on this, we have a strong case," Mr. Jacobs said, his eyes scanning the documents. "The ticket was bought with your money, which means you have a claim to the winnings." I felt a glimmer of hope. "So what's our next step?" "We file for a court injunction to freeze the lottery winnings until this is sorted out legally. Then we prepare for a court battle," he replied, his tone determined. The court day arrived faster than I had anticipated. Mark and Susan were there, smug looks on their faces, as if they had already won. My heart was pounding as I took my seat, Mr. Jacobs beside me. The judge, a stern-looking woman, called the court to order. Mr. Jacobs presented our case with clear, concise arguments, emphasizing the transaction and my contribution to our family's finances. Mark's lawyer tried to argue that the ticket was a separate entity from our marital assets, but Mr. Jacobs countered effectively, showcasing the joint nature of our finances and Mark's lack of contribution. Then it was time for Mark to take the stand. His lawyer asked, "Mr. Johnson, did you use your wife's credit card to purchase the lottery ticket?" Mark replied with a hint of arrogance in his voice, "Yes, but it was just a stroke of luck. It has nothing to do with her." His lawyer continued, "And what were your intentions with the winnings?" Mark glanced at me before answering, "To start a new life." I was tired of being underappreciated and belittled. I felt a surge of anger but remained silent. It was my turn to testify. Mr. Jacobs asked me, "Mrs. Johnson, can you tell the court about your financial contributions to your household?" I took a deep breath. I've been the primary breadwinner for the past few years. I paid the bills, took care of our daughter, and even supported Mark's mother financially. The judge listened intently, occasionally jotting down notes. After both sides presented their cases, she called for a recess before making her decision. The wait was agonizing. When we were called back in, the judge looked at both of us before delivering her verdict. Considering the evidence and the circumstances, I rule that the lottery winnings are a joint marital asset. Therefore, I award 3/4 of the winnings to Mrs. Johnson and 1/4 to Mr. Johnson. Mark's face was a picture of shock, and Susan's smugness had evaporated. I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. It was more than just a legal victory. It was justice. Life after the courtroom drama was like stepping onto a new path, one filled with possibilities and new challenges. My priority was Lily and rebuilding our lives with the winnings that I had fought so hard for. The money was invested wisely, ensuring a stable future for us. Meanwhile, I heard through the grapevine that Mark and his mother, Susan, had blown through their share on frivolous entertainment and were now left with nothing. One day, while running errands, I bumped into Mark. He was a shadow of his former self, unshaven, clothes rumpled, and an air of defeat hanging around him. "Ella, look at what you've done to me. I'm broke, in debt, and they're taking the house," he blurted out, his voice tinged with desperation. I looked at him, feeling no sympathy. "Mark, you did this to yourself. You and your mother couldn't handle the money, and now you're paying the price." He scowled, bitterness seeping through his words. "So you're just going to gloat, see me suffer?" I shook my head, my resolve firm. "I'm not gloating, Mark. I'm just living my life. You made your choices, and I made mine," I said, cutting him off as he tried to interject. "You know, Mark, you and your mother never forgave me for taking what was rightfully mine. You spent your share without a thought for the future. That's on you." Mark's face twisted with anger, but there was a hint of regret in his eyes. "You could have shared more, you could have," he muttered. I interrupted him. "I could have what, Mark? Bailed you out after you betrayed me? After you and your mother laughed in my face? No. I've moved on." He stood there defeated as I walked away. In that moment, I realized how far I had come. I had faced betrayal and heartache, but I hadn't let it break me. Instead, I built a better life for Lily and me, a life built on hard work and smart choices.